Hi, let's talk about how psychological safety hits you differently when you're the outsider in the room. You know the moment I mean. You're in the meeting, you've prepared, you know what you want to say, and you know it's a good contribution. But somewhere between the thought and the words, something stalls. Not nervously, exactly. Not imposter syndrome, though you know that feeling too. This is something more specific, a quiet awareness that the room is a rhythm you weren't taught, that the humor lands between people who share a reference you don't quite hold, and that the way challenge is supposed to sound here is not the way challenge sounds where you come from. So you recalibrate. You wait a bit longer than you should. You soften the edge off of your idea, or you stay quiet. I've been in that room, not once, many times, across many countries, many tables, many languages. That were not my first. And what I've come to understand after more than 20 years of living and working internationally is that what stops you in the moment is not personal failing, it's a structural one. Psychological safety at work is supposed to solve this. But here's what the conversation tends to leave out: psychological safety doesn't feel the same for everyone in the room. So let's talk about the science behind speaking up. You know, I like to quote science, so here it goes. Amy Edmondson, professor at Harvard Business School, has spent decades studying what makes teams perform. Her foundational research, originally conducted in hospital settings and then later expanded across industries, defines psychological safety as the shared belief that a team is a safe place for international risk taking. In more plain terms, it's the belief that you can speak up with an idea, a concern, a mistake, or a challenge without being punished or humiliated for it. Her work and the body of research that followed it shows that psychological safety is not a nice to have, it is a performance variable. Google's Project Aristotle, a large scale internal study completed in 2016, found psychological safety to be the single most important factor in distinguishing high performing teams from average ones. So, above skill, above structure, above individual talent. It has rightly become one of the dominant conversations in learning and development. Teams need it. Leaders need to create it, and organizations need to measure it. But here's the problem most psychological safety training doesn't address. The research base is almost entirely built on culturally homogeneous teams, or on models that treat the team as a culturally neutral unit. So the experience of being the only person in the room who learn to communicate, challenge, defer, or dissent in a different cultural register, that experience is largely absent from the framework. And when you build a tool without accounting for who will be trying to use it, you end up with a tool that works for some people better than others. So what happens when the room wasn't built for you? Let me be specific about what made psychological safety on international teams harder to access than the standard model suggests. 1. Language asymmetry. Contributing in your second or even third language is not just harder, it is cognitively different. Research by Loring and Selmer on multilingual workspaces shows that non-native speakers self-censor more frequently. They fear being misunderstood, and they spend cognitive bandwidth that native speakers do not have to spend. Recognize any of these? When you are managing grammar, register, and tone in real time, while also trying to form a thought worth saying, the window for interpersonal risk-taking narrows considerably. Psychological safety cannot function as advertised when the basic act of participation costs some people far more than others. Second, cultural scripts for disagreement. So what counts as appropriate challenge, as constructive pushback, or even enthusiastic engagement varies enormously by cultural background. Hofstede's research on cultural dimensions shows that societies differ significantly in power difference, the degree to which hierarchy is expected and respected, and in uncertainty avoidance, which shapes how people respond to ambiguity and risk. So in some cultural contexts, direct disagreement is a mark of engagement. In others, it is face-threatening and inappropriate. A team that has built speaking up norms around one cultural script and then wonders why some members are quiet has not solved its psychological safety problems. It has just made it invisible. 3. Reference point exclusion. Now, this one is subtle and often unintentional, but it does real damage. Humor, idiom, shared institutional memory, or inside references. These create belonging for people who share them and quiet alienation for people who don't. Before anyone has contributed anything, the room has already signaled who is on the inside. Psychological safety is built on trust, and trust takes longer to build when you are starting from a position of cultural distance. 4. The so-called credibility tax. International professionals, particularly those from non-Western educational professional backgrounds, frequently encounter a form of additional scrutiny before their expertise is accepted at face value. More proof, more signaling, more energy spent establishing legitimacy before the idea itself can land. This is a form of labor that homogeneous team members simply do not have to perform. I think of a particular kind of meeting I've experienced more than once over the years. Arriving well prepared, reading the room carefully, waiting for the right opening, and then watching the conversation move on before I found my footing in it. Not because the idea was wrong, but because I was still figuring out how this room wanted to be spoken to. The praise that often follows this experience, whether it's "you're so adaptable" or "oh, you handle everything so well," it's kindly meant, and I understand it. But international professionals are often celebrated for their resilience, their self-reliance, their ability to just get on with it, precisely at the moment when the system they are navigating should be doing more work. Resilience is a genuine quality, but resilience that compensates for a broken container is exhausting. And naming that distinction matters. So let's talk about the cost no one is measuring. For organizations, this is not only a well-being issue, it is a business issue, and it carries a measurable cost. Research consistently shows that diverse teams outperform homogeneous ones when psychological safety is genuinely present. When psychological safety on international teams is culturally unaware, diversity becomes a liability rather than an asset. You have invested in bringing different perspectives into the room. But if the conditions in the room don't allow those perspectives to surface safely, you are not accessing what you paid for. The international team member is present, but not fully heard. Engaged, but not fully contributing. And that gap has a cost. Most psychological safety training, as currently designed, does not close it. A standard intervention that teaches people to speak up, invites everyone to share, and celebrates open dialogue is valuable. But it assumes a level playing field that international teams rarely have. So without addressing language asymmetry, cultural scripts, and reference point exclusion, you are asking some team members to simply try harder within a system that was not designed with them in mind. Building resilience at work at an organizational level means designing team environments where individual self-reliance does not have to substitute for structural safety. That is, where resilience training for professionals shifts from being a personal development exercise to a genuine systemic investment. Not making people more resilient to a problem that shouldn't exist, but addressing the conditions that make the problem exist in the first place. So the good news is that culturally aware psychological safety work is not a specialist niche. It makes the whole team better because the practices that help your international team members speak up also slow the room, reduce groupthink, and create more genuine space for everyone. So how could we design psychological safety that actually includes everyone? What does it look like in practice to design for the outsider in the room? 1. Slow the room down deliberately. Structure approaches like writing ideas before speaking, taking time turns, inviting specific input from those who haven't spoken, reduce the advantage held by people who are most fluent in the room's dominant communication style. This is not about making meetings longer, it's about making them more honest. 2. Name the cultural context explicitly. When a team acknowledges that communication norms vary, that silence is not disengagement, that directness means different things to different people, or that the way someone phrases a challenge is not a signal of their commitment, then it creates permission to contribute differently. The conversation doesn't need to be a cultural seminar. It just needs to be honest. 3. Separate language performance from idea quality. This is a specific thing managers can be trained to do. Notice when they are evaluating how something was said rather than what was said, and correct for it consciously. Non-native speakers are routinely underestimated when accent, phrasing, or grammatical imprecision creates an impression of less intellectual rigor. That impression is almost always wrong, and acting on it is expensive. Then, invest in belonging and not just inclusion. Inclusion is structural. It is about access and representation. Belonging is the felt experience, the sense that you are genuinely welcome, that your way of being in the room is not a problem to be managed. The two are not the same. And treating them as interchangeable is where a lot of well-intentioned diversity work falls short. McKinsey's, Deloitte, and Edmondson's own work all point in the same direction. Cognitive diversity, cultural range, and varied professional backgrounds drive better decisions, more creative solutions, and stronger outcomes. But that advantage only materializes when the diverse team member can actually contribute what they bring. Belonging takes more time, more attention, more willingness to notice who is quietly adapting so that everyone else doesn't have to. In my coaching and training work with international professionals, executives, and teams, I see this gap at close range. I work with people who have built formidable self-reliance over years of quietly navigating rooms that weren't built for them. What I notice consistently is how much changes in confidence, in clarity, and in output when they no longer have to put that energy into simply belonging and can turn it towards the work they actually came to do. If you are reading this as someone who has sat in that meeting, who has recalibrated, waited, softened, or stayed quiet, I want to say clearly that the difficulty you are experienced was not a measure of your capability, it was a measure of the design. So what should you take with you? Psychological safety at work is a design choice. And every design encodes assumptions about who the user is. When those assumptions are built around a culturally homogeneous norm, the tool works well for some and not as well for others. So the fix is not to make the outsiders more resilient. The fix is to widen the design. For international professionals, naming these matters, not as a grievance, but as a reorientation. What you have experienced in those rooms was structural, not personal. And the skills you have built navigating them are real. You deserve an environment that works with you, not one you must perpetually overcome. For organizations, the practical question is straightforward. Are you actually accessing what your international talent brings? If your psychological safety training hasn't grappled with the cultural dimension, it probably isn't. This is work I care about deeply because I have been that person in the room and because I have seen what changes when the room is built for everyone in it. So let's talk. If this resonated, if you recognize yourself in that meeting, or if you spent years building self-reliance in rooms that didn't quite fit, I'd love to have a conversation. My coaching work is built around exactly this, helping international professionals find their footing, use their voice, and redirect their energy that they've been spending on that adaptation towards what they actually came here to do. If you're an HR director or an L&D manager, or even a team leader wondering whether your current approach to psychological safety accounts for cultural difference, I'm equally happy to talk about what that could look like in your organization. Just book a free strategy call, check the link below, and let's find out what is possible. And if this kind of thinking is what you want landing in your inbox on a regular basis, you're very welcome to subscribe to my newsletter on my website. Again, check also the link below. I hope to hear from you soon.